Good afternoon, everyone. Does it seem dark in here?
Yes.
Yeah, it seems dark to me. Hopefully just you guys, not me.
What's that? It's just our
Just
mood.
you. It's just your mood. Okay. Well, with that with that auspicious opening, let me.
Hey everyone, I'm Kevin Gosztola, and welcome to this week's broadcast. That was Matthew Miller, the ghoulish figure that, in my view, has become the face of U.S. support for the genocidal violence that we've seen carried out by. One second. Let me fix my audio because it sounds terrible right now, and that's because I have it going in the wrong location. That should be better. And so welcome to this broadcast. Now that we've got that technical issue out of the way, that was Matthew Miller, the ghoulish figure who has become what I think is the face of U.S. government support for the violence in Gaza, the assault on Gaza that has been unfolding. I want to dive into some of what he's been saying. These are clips that have gone viral on Twitter, other social media platforms. They've been shared. They're appalling. These are comments. That was just some banter that I think is a fun way to get into this, because none of this is an enjoyable discussion. What we are seeing is a horrifying for everyone in Gaza, and the fact that so much of the world seems to be complicit and is allowing this to happen puts us all in a position where I think it should make you feel sick to your stomach. And so, discussing Matthew Miller, I'd like to put him in the hot seat with this show, but also I have 13 different journalists who were killed much earlier in the cycle of violence that we have seen, and I'll pay tribute to them, which is part of what I do with the dissenter over at the dissenter.org. I don't always dig into these foreign policy or matters of war, but I do get into press freedom, and nobody can argue with the fact, or should argue with the fact, that journalists are being massacred, they're being executed. Israeli military forces have been gunning down and trying to eliminate these families. So if you go to the dissenter.org, you can subscribe there, support the work that we do, the work that is done on whistleblowers, on government secrecy as well. It's all important. I'm the author of a book called Guilty of Journalism: The Political Case Against Julian Assange. And that work dovetails with what we're going to discuss today, because journalists that are under attack in Gaza, Julian Assange is being detained at Belmarsh prison. These are all people that the U.S. empire doesn't want to be able to show you the truth. They said as much. It was quoted in, I believe, Politico. It was said that they were reluctant or had reservations about a ceasefire because they were afraid that when the violence paused, journalists would be able to get into Gaza and show people the destruction. And when it was unsafe, when there was constant bombardment, as it is now in the southern part of Gaza especially, but all parts of Gaza seem to be under siege and assault still, they were saying openly that they didn't want journalists to show people the truth of what was happening in Gaza. And so let's get into it. We've got a lot to get to here. So the first clip that I would like to share with you is this clip. These are both briefings from the past week. These are both briefings either from December 6th or December 4th. And so in the last 7 days, these are remarks that are being shared. These are remarks that are being uttered days after the so-called humanitarian pause fell apart. It was a temporary ceasefire. It was an opening, in my opinion, to have a more permanent ceasefire. But Israel never stopped attacking Palestinians. Israel never actually laid down its arms. And Hamas is not in a position when it comes to the world stage, and they're the only representatives of Palestinians in this. I know who else is going to stand up for them. They're the body that controls Gaza. Yes, they committed that attack on October 7th, but what power do they have to influence and stop the Israeli government from attacking Palestinians during a ceasefire? And if they violate the ceasefire, who's going to enforce that, and who's going to hold Israel accountable for violating? And when Hamas decides finally to retaliate or not release a particular group of hostages that were in the negotiations because they believe that Israel is not obeying the ceasefire, I think this is where it all started to fall apart. And so you have Matthew Miller, who is the State Department spokesperson. He has been getting up day after day after day during this war that has now gone on for almost 2 months, around 2 months, exactly today, about 2 months. And he is a figure who I'll go ahead and give you some quick background here. He's a figure who has been with the State Department since April of this year. So 9 months he's been working this job full time. He started off as a kind of PR strategist in the late 90s. He was a communications director in Florida for John Kerry, and we all know how that worked out. John Kerry failed to beat George W. Bush. Obviously, I'm aware that in Ohio there was potential fraud and a recount was necessary, but John Kerry conceded without fighting. And so ultimately the race was so narrow and they weren't able to defeat George W. Bush, who at that time, a major campaign issue in 2004 were the atrocities and the occupation of Iraq by U.S. military forces. That was something that John Kerry had made a campaign issue against George W. Bush. Matthew Miller was a Florida communications director. And after doing that, he was a communications director for U.S. Senator Robert Goldbar Thief Menendez, the guy who's in trouble for embezzling and having corruption that reaches into different areas of the world and is currently under investigation for graft and not willing to resign. He worked with Menendez from 2005 to 2007, so 2 years. Then Matthew Miller was a comms director, a communications director for the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee for 2 years. And in the Department of Justice, he was at the Office of Public Affairs as the director for over 2 years, from February 2009 to July 2011. This is someone who has a lot of experience. And so under Obama, he was at the Justice Department. During this time, it was in the first couple of years of Barack Obama's administration. And I know Matthew Miller because of the Assange case. I know him because he's the one who articulated to the press, believe it was the Washington Post, that there was a New York Times problem, and that was why Julian Assange was not going to be prosecuted. And they had thought about going after him, but they realized that if they wanted to indict him and charge him with violating the Espionage Act, they would be in a position where they would have to charge New York Times editors, New York Times journalists, and other Western media that had been involved in publishing classified documents that were provided by U.S. Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. That was my first introduction to Matthew Miller, and why I recognize the name now, as he is before us justifying and rationalizing the genocidal violence that has been unfolding in Gaza. He was with some firm named Via Novo from 2011 to 2023, so for 12 years. And he had a position or a gig as a MSNBC analyst. I think he was on air during President Donald Trump's administration. That was a big opportunity for Obama officials, former Obama officials, and they were frequently on, as well as people who were in the circle of Hillary Clinton. Many of them were on air during Donald Trump's administration. So he had time to continue to burnish his ability to speak on TV. So he's very skilled. He's a skilled spin doctor, and he's putting his spin doctor services to work defending Israel's assault. So let's get to this. Here is Matthew Miller, and he's being questioned about the violence that has been unfolding, especially the resumption of violence, its fierce intensity in southern Gaza.
Yeah, Saeed, go ahead.
So I understand you correctly. You're saying that the killing of 700 Palestinians over a period of 24.
Saeed, I always like when I use my own words, not when you try to put words in my mouth.
I want to understand what you said properly. You said that we have seen improvement. I'm asking you directly. You think that the killing of 700 people in 24-hour period is an improvement? So I'm just asking you to say yes or no.
I don't.
In accordance to what you said.
So Saeed, I don't think you were listening very closely to
what I said. I was listening very closely.
Well, clearly not, because what I said
Right.
is we have seen improvement in their plans for Khan Yunis, their plans for the South. We have seen them evacuate specific neighborhoods rather than entire areas. So the numbers of displaced persons will hopefully be lower in southern Gaza than it was in the north. But when it comes to results, we are going to monitor it very closely. And I think I was pretty clear about that. And I think the Secretary was pretty clear about that on Thursday.
Give us a figure. What would be acceptable? What would be acceptable? Because you talked about...
Saeed, we mourn the loss of every civilian life. We don't want to see any civilians killed in this.
What have you done to really minimize that? Remember, Gaza is the size of Washington, D.C. When you tell people to move, like now, and they have nowhere to go, they're striking in Khan Yunis. They're saying, actually, we're hitting every place in Gaza. So where should people go?
People should go.
Be the end?
Saeed, let's take it one question at a time. Before you asked a question, let me answer it.
Sure.
People should go to the UN designated sites that are on Israeli lists as deconfliction zones that should not be the target of military campaigns. There are already people who are sheltering in those. As the campaign moves to the south and Israel evacuates specific neighborhoods or orders specific neighborhoods to be evacuated, that is where people should go.
Okay, but we know that they bombed UN facilities and so on. Let me ask you a couple of other questions. You said that...
All right, so let's take that first. And Saeed is the journalist who is questioning Matthew Miller, doing a very good job, I would say, asking the pertinent questions of the hour that should be asked to somebody who is there representing the U.S. government. And unfortunately for Saeed and other journalists in the room, sometimes they run up against the fact that these are people who are paid to lie. These are people who are paid to justify to the nth degree policies that are indefensible. And so as the skin around Matthew Miller continues to sink into his skull and he feels hollow inside, the only thing that Matthew Miller can do is ignore the fact that was put to him at the beginning, which is 700 people earlier this week were killed in a span of 24 hours as Israel resumed its assault on Gaza. And he doesn't really have much of significance or anything of substance to say to Saeed, pointing out that UN sites have been attacked, telling people to go to a United Nations site, which he labels as deconfliction zones, and we'll come back to that later, or deconfliction sites. Those are not places in which anybody can go and guarantee that they will live. It's been widely reported that Israeli military forces, which have been cheered by the United States government for warning civilians ahead of time of where to go ahead of bombing operations, that they're sending them in a direction and then they're bombing those areas in which those people have been directed towards. So the idea that any of this is somehow getting better for Gazans is ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous that he can stand there with a straight face and say this. And aspirationally, Matthew Miller stands up there and he represents the position of the U.S. government that they are optimistic that Israel is going to somehow be a lot more kinder and gentler in its bombing campaign against the people of Gaza, and that it won't be as ugly and grotesque as it has been for the last 2 months. But we all know that in the days since, it hasn't shifted at all. There isn't anything meaningful, and no one in the U.S. government can say what they've managed to convince Israel to do to protect civilians. They have not altered their behavior at all. Nothing meaningful, nothing that is of any consequence to the people on the ground in Gaza who are trying to survive and live. You know, this is where they are supposed to live. And the State Department has been asked, do you support ethnic cleansing? Because it would seem like these people, 2.3 million in Gaza, are being pushed out. And the goal or objective is for them to leave and go to surrounding countries. Egypt could take them. Other surrounding countries, I suppose, Jordan, Turkey, I don't know, is Iraq, Iran, are these countries expected to take Palestinians? Whatever the case may be, Israel does not want them to occupy or live, it's their land, it does not want them to live in Gaza any longer. And they want Gaza. I don't know what they're going to do with it. They just destroyed it they're blowing it to oblivion, but they would prefer that people not inhabit Gaza any longer. And the response of the U.S. government and people like Matthew Miller is to say, oh, we don't believe that's happening. And even if it was what Israel is trying to do, if that was their end game, that's not something we support. We do not endorse driving millions of Gazans out of the Gaza Strip. So I will continue. And let me just welcome those of you who are tuned in. And I just show appreciation to you, John. I appreciate the super chat. I appreciate the donation. And thanks for being here to watch this. And you are right. These people are lying, bloodthirsty ghouls. Where's their humanity? And that is the point that I will continue to drive home by doing this today.
Hamas committed atrocities, right? Okay. Do you call the killing of 20,000 Palestinians an atrocity?
So,
does that befit the term atrocity?
Saeed, I was speaking to the intentional murdering of civilians that we saw Hamas commit. I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there is anyone questioning that Hamas intentionally killed civilians. That is by definition an atrocity.
And you don't think that Israel intentionally kills civilians?
We think far too many people. I have not seen evidence that they are intentionally killing civilians. We believe that far too many civilians have been killed. But again, this goes back to the underlying problem of this entire situation, which is that Hamas has embedded itself inside civilians, inside civilian homes, inside mosques, in schools, in churches. It is Hamas that is putting these civilians in harm's way. For all the questions, and I understand why people I stand here and people ask me questions about what Israel should do. I'm happy to take those questions. Right. I'm surprised I don't hear more people saying, why doesn't Hamas lay down its arms? Why doesn't Hamas move out of schools? Why doesn't Hamas take additional steps to protect civilians?
All right. Matthew Miller says the questions should be directed to Hamas. All right. The balance of force is such that Israel, the Israeli government, the Israeli military forces have the monopoly over what happens in Gaza. As we are seeing, is not Hamas who runs Gaza right now. I mean, they're not able to. Hospitals have been destroyed. The vast majority of hospitals have been turned into facilities that are not able to operate. Good luck getting running water, food, people who are in need of sanitation, entire residential buildings, neighborhoods are being flattened, and you're seeing families, multiple generations are massacred. They no longer exist. Schools are under attack, so kids are no longer able to go somewhere for education. Everyone's living under siege, hoping to survive, hoping the bombs do not fall where they are located. And as they move to areas where they might be directed, they pray that the bombs do not fall where Israeli military forces have just directed them. So the idea that it's Hamas that should answer for this violence, Hamas is not unleashing these bombs disproportionately against Gaza. So since the State Department purports to care about international law, which I think has been rendered meaningless by everything that we are seeing, but since they seem to care about international law and human rights, it's supposed to be proportional. So just because you think there might be one Hamas fighter there or a few Hamas fighters here in a hospital or hiding out in a school, you're supposed to send in a team of military troops or soldiers to go in to that school and retrieve the fighters or shoot the fighters and then go. You're not supposed to wipe out it with this massive bomb that leaves a crater and then everyone's buried underneath the rubble and you have children who are there for days, and then when they are found, they say things that are gut-wrenching, like, please save my mom and my dad and my grandma before you save me, because I'm doing okay, or I think I can wait. I really believe you should help my mom and dad because I don't want them to die. I'd also like my grandmother to live too. These are the human beings that Matthew Miller is devaluing as he speaks about Hamas. And Hamas attacked people on October 7th. Israel has been attacking people for 2 months. For 2 months, we are talking about 16 to 20,000 people have been killed in Gaza. 1,200 by Hamas on October 7th. There was retaliation, and now we're up to 20,000. And Saeed is asked, how many people have to die before you say that's enough retaliation on the part of Israel? How many people have to die before you say to the Israeli government, this is enough? What is your goal? If the goal is to stamp out Hamas, at what point are you going to shake people in power in Israel and tell them that that's not a logical outcome that can be achieved? That's not something that can be accomplished, any more than we were going to be able to remove all the Taliban or resistance fighters from Afghanistan, which we saw when we left. It was 20 years later, the country collapses, we move out, and they return and take over. Okay, if we're not going to occupy Afghanistan, then who's going to be there when we leave? The same would go for the Gaza Strip. If Israel isn't going to take it over and run it, and if that's not what the U.S. government is going to openly admit is the goal of Israel, as it seems that they would like to take this territory and claim it for the Israeli government, then clearly they should be objecting to what Israel is attempting to do, this assault. And so here, let's continue with what Saeed is asking, because this is such an important line of questions. But I'll throw in very quickly that the idea that Hamas is constantly using civilians for human shields is undermined by investigations that Amnesty International has conducted into past cycles of violence from the early 2010s, where they were having a tough time confirming all of the claims that were put forward by the Israeli government and then backed up by the US government. There are examples as well of Israel and its soldiers using Palestinians as human shields. That's not anything you're ever going to hear from Matthew Miller. He knows that as the top appointed ghoul to represent the foreign policy of the United States to the world, that he can never acknowledge that Israel has used Palestinians in such a dehumanizing and vile and putrid way. And so here he continues with Saeed.
Because we think they should, as we think Israel should.
Okay, so you are asking Hamas to surrender. Is that what you're asking?
We would welcome Hamas laying down its arms and surrendering at any point.
Hamas is not an army. They don't have air force. They don't have a navy. They don't have artillery. They have none of these things. They don't really have any kind of regular kind of structure that they can conduct their surrender.
You know, that Saeed, they may not have a navy. No. Let me finish. They may not have an air force. They have sufficient firepower to have killed 1,200 people on October 7th. So don't tell me that Hamas can't lay down their arms and take additional steps to protect civilians, let alone moving out of all the areas that are putting Palestinian civilians in harm's way. They absolutely can. They could do it today if they cared at all about civilian life.
My last question to you, the UN, a former official in the UN, Mr. Mukaiber, said that the most clear-cut case of genocide, the Israeli bombardment and the killing of 20,000 people thus far, is the most clear-cut case of genocide. Do you agree with him?
So the State Department has a rigorous process for evaluating what constitutes genocide, ethnic cleansing, or a crime against humanity. Those are terms we only use with very explicit care. You've seen us be very You've seen us be very deliberate about that in the past. We are monitoring the evolving situations and are examining facts as they develop. It's an extremely challenging space to get all the information that might be available, but we support Israel's right to continue to take action to ensure that Hamas can never conduct terrorist attacks like it did on October 7th again. And as part of that, we urge Israel to take all possible measures to minimize civilian harm. And I've just gone through a number of those measures.
But it doesn't qualify for genocide.
I just answered that. Go ahead, Tracy.
It couldn't be more clear to Palestinians, to Arabs that live in the Middle East, to people who are in the global South, who have seen the word genocide get thrown around by the U.S. government, that it endorses what Israel is doing, where it is flattening and wiping out entire neighborhoods and communities, the massacres that are happening at the hands of Israeli soldiers. That is fully backed by Matthew Miller and all of the U.S. government. I mean, he is the face. This is what we're seeing. This very ghostly looking figure, this pale, gaunt man who seems to have his soul evaporating in him as the days go by. He is there. He is attaching his name and persona to the genocidal violence that is happening in Israel. And he's the biggest defender of it right now. And all people who are begging for this to stop can see is that this U.S. government spokesperson is out there defending this brutal violence that has been relentless, except for a pause for a few days in which some people were released by Israel from prisons, some Palestinians were, and then some hostages were returned to Israel in an exchange. And that was the moment when there was some relief, there was a little bit of hope, and then it's all gone away, and it hasn't proven to be there's no reason for hope if the US is going to take this position where they co-sign everything that is coming out of the right-wing government, essentially out of this government. And it's not to say that there's any opposition that can really change it. It's not to say that there is an alternative. There are other politicians that have presented themselves as challengers to Benjamin Netanyahu, but they do not feel any different about how to handle and treat the people, the Palestinians in Gaza, as well as the West Bank. And so here he is, faced with the reality of what is taking place on the ground, put to him by journalist Saeed, and he's saying, no, we are not going to call that a genocide. It takes time to do an assessment. Well, they're not going to do an assessment. Don't let his bullshit get to you. Don't be taken under the spell of what he's saying. Genocide in America, that is a word that is reserved for the Russian government in Ukraine. There are only genocides of Ukrainians. There are no genocides of Palestinians. There will only be genocides of Uyghurs or ethnic populations that are under the control of the Chinese government. China commits genocide, but the Israeli government most certainly does not commit genocide according to the US government. There are genocides that are committed in African countries between rival factions who are jostling for control over countries. And as order is disintegrating, there are people who get killed. There is a feeling that there should be some kind of responsibility to protect, and that has been completely undermined by that wing of the Democratic or the liberal Democratic wing that is pro-intervention, because there's many times that they don't go in to save anybody. There are people who are being slaughtered in Congo, and there are people, I think now in Sudan, that are in trouble, but there's no forces being sent in by the US military to save them. And again, here we are, Matthew Miller defending the right of Israel to keep dropping all these weapons, which, by the way, are coming from the US government to Israel. A lot of them, quite a bit of them, are munitions that the US government has sent, and they continue to clamor for the ability to send those without any strings attached, so that Israel can do with them whatever they will against the people of Gaza. I've talked about that clip for a long time. So let me remove this here and let me go on to the next one. The next clip is one in which we see Matthew Miller spreading a lie and getting caught spreading a lie about rape, about Hamas raping hostages. So let me get this up here and we'll play. This is about 4 minutes long.
Can I go back to something you said in response to one of the questions about sexual violence? I'm just interested because the phrasing you used was curious to me, at least. You said you have no reason to doubt any reports that rape was used as sexual violence was used by Hamas. You said the fact that they, meaning Hamas, continue to hold women hostages. Okay, that is a fact. The fact that they continue to hold children hostages, that is also a fact. But then you said the fact that it seems one of the reasons they don't want to turn women over that they've been holding hostage, and the reason that the pause fell apart, is that they don't want those women to be able to talk about what happened to them in their time in captivity. The fact that it seems, is this just conjecture on your part, or do you know? Do you have very good reason to believe, evidence to believe that Hamas is deliberately continuing to hold on to female hostages because they're concerned that they will speak about atrocities that they were subjected to?
So I will accept the edit, not fact. Seems is a better way to say it, but let me answer the question. The humanitarian pause, which resulted in a release of hostages, was negotiated with some very clear terms, and that was that children and women would be the first priority to be released. Near the end of that pause, last Wednesday, Thursday, when we were getting towards the end, Hamas was still holding on to women that should have been the next to be released. They refused to release them.
Right.
They broke the deal. came up with excuses why. Ultimately, I don't think any of those excuses were credible, and I shouldn't get into any of them here. But certainly one of the reasons that a number of people believe they refused to release them is they didn't want people to hear what those women would have to say publicly.
when you say-
I won't say fact because I don't know it for a fact.
Oh, okay, but when you say a number of people believe,
I just let me just say
people in the U.S. government?
let me just finish my answer. We have seen Hamas commit all kinds of atrocities.
Look,
No,
I'm a little bit concerned. You're trying to go. I am not
I-
suggesting that these things did not happen, and I am not suggesting that
And,
what
Matt,
you
I just-
suggest is
I just
their
wanna be-
reason for not releasing the remaining female hostages is wrong. I just want to know.
I just want to be very
do
sensitive
you
in my
have
language, Matt.
Any evidence to suggest that that is what it is, or is it just
I want to be very
conjecture?
sensitive in my language when talking about people that continue to be held hostage, that have families on the outside. What I will say is we know Hamas has committed.
This is an incredible exchange. People who are tuned into this. He's caught. He knows. Matthew Miller is the journalist from the AP who is questioning him, and he knows. Not long ago, he said, and I think it was during this briefing, that it seems that Hamas has not released women hostages because they are sexually abusing or raping them. And so when Matthew Miller says, well, it seems, what do you mean? Do you have proof? Do you have evidence? Do you have any reason to believe? He's looking down at his notes, but the note sheet, the talking points he prepared, doesn't come with some guide to get out of the lie that you just told. And so all he can do is fall back on the prejudice and the fear and the terror that has been spread about Hamas, and to again conjure up images of what Hamas will do, which are decidedly Islamophobic, right? Like the idea that they're more likely to do sexual violence to women is based in a kind of way of looking at Arabs as a kind of barbarian horde that this is rooted in colonialism over the course of Western history. You don't have that for Israeli soldiers. Like there's not a deep-seated belief that Israeli soldiers are somehow prone to rape and abuse of hostages or people they take captive. But nonetheless, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of reports from people who have been taken captive by Israeli soldiers, Israeli forces, that say they were abused sexually, that they were terrorized in ways that we're supposed to fear these women being treated in this manner. And he can't come up with any proof. So when confronted, he starts to devolve into babble as he is responding to the questions from Matthew Lee. So here, let's hear the rest of this.
Atrocities.
I
We know they hold on. They continue to hold women.
Yeah.
They were going to release these women, and then suddenly at the last point reneged on the deal and were never able to provide a credible reason why. We hope that they will change their mind and release those women.
So,
but we haven't
but you
seen.
don't know though for certain that the or a reason for them reneging on the deal and not releasing them is because they're worried about them speaking about.
So I'm not able
what
to
they
speak with a
endured.
definitive assessment that that is the case. We would like to see them release the hostages so they could talk about whatever treatment or mistreatment they had undergone.
Sorry, man.
Saeed, I have gone to you number.
Please, Matt, on this point.
Elizabeth, go ahead.
Matt.
Olivia, sorry, Elizabeth. Saeed, I asked you. Saeed, I will come. Saeed, I will come to
There
you.
could be soldiers.
Saeed, I will come. There are women who are not soldiers who continue to be held.
But there are
No.
women, Palestinian women.
And there are women,
Right?
so I will come back to you. You've had a number of
Please.
questions already. Olivia, sorry, go ahead.
What he's saying there is important. So Saeed was trying to get in a follow-up and say that there have been reports that the hostages that weren't released that are women are soldiers. And so they're much more higher in value than civilians. And this is a war that is unfolding, although we like to treat it in a way that infantilizes everything. Uh, Hamas is waging war right now against the Israeli government, against Israeli military forces. They're because in the bombardment from Israel, there are Palestinian resistance fighters that have chosen to fight back in much the same way that there were militants that fought back against the apartheid government of South Africa. And Nelson Mandela had defended their right and spoke about defending the right of Palestinian resistance fighters to fight back. And if you want them to be peaceful, then Israel should stop being violent. And so, in any case, these hostages that are soldiers are not exactly the innocent kind of people that you would think. They don't deserve to be raped. I don't think anybody should be tortured or raped in their custody. But if they're being held so that there can be a release of more Palestinian prisoners, they can be used as leverage to force an end to the bombing, whatever, that seems to fit within what is acceptable in war, or I hesitate to use the word acceptable. That seems to be a natural byproduct of war, and one in which we should not feign outrage, because if they were deployed, they were people who were out there in the field fighting Palestinians, and so it comes with being out there fighting the same way, that Hamas militants are likely to be executed on site. Again, I'm not justifying this violence, but nobody is going to bat an eye if the Israeli government says, well, we're not releasing these people in the exchange because these are high-ranking Hamas fighters. Nobody would say, well, you absolutely should release them. The same should be said about Israeli soldiers. All right, so there's a lot of chat here, and I have one more video to show, but I want to engage with people who are watching and say, yeah, there is a Patreon that is out there, and if you wanted to donate to support this work, you can go to patreon.com/shadowproof. And that's where I would direct you, and I'll put it up there. And most of the money will come to me. More of it will come to me than Google. Not sure about the proportion of memberships and the super chats. I don't know how much that money actually gets back to me. I think Google takes quite a pretty good cut of that. So if you want to support this journalism, go there. But better, you can also chip in and donate over at thedissenter.org, which is the newsletter where I do this work. I'm going to be getting to journalists that have been killed or massacred in this violence. But there's one more horrific clip that has to be shown. And also, let me just say that I think Gregory had to leave, but he was asking me about this HR 4175, something about stealing from Russia. I'm not familiar with this legislation, so sorry I couldn't answer that while you were here, Gregory, but also I don't know that I could have given you anything. I would have had to behave like Matthew Miller and lie to you and pretend like I was an expert, and I don't think that would be fair. So let's go on to the last clip that I have pulled. This one again gets even more evil, if you can believe. This one involves Saeed asking Matthew Miller about the babies that were found in the hospital that was bombed and attacked, and these babies were taken off the incubators. So they were found, their bodies are decomposing. And Saeed asks him, was this a war crime? Was this a war crime? And so let's hear the exchange.
A couple of other issues. There was a report that Israel's assault forced the nurse to leave babies behind. They were found decomposing. Are you aware of the story?
I am aware of that report, Saeed.
And do you take it as it happened, or if it did happen, is that a war crime?
Saeed, I would say that is a tragedy.
Okay.
It's a tragedy for those babies.
Right.
It's a tragedy for their family members. Right. It's a tragedy for the Palestinian people, and it is a tragedy for the world.
Okay.
And it is why we have made clear that far too many Palestinians have been killed in this conflict, and that, of course, includes far too many Palestinian children and, of course, Palestinian babies. And it is why we have taken every measure we could to speak loudly and clearly to the government of Israel that it needs to do everything it can to minimize civilian harm. And it's why we have worked to try and move humanitarian assistance in. And it is also why I will say we have said that Hamas should stop hiding its fighters in hospitals.
I'm talking about this particular incident.
I know. It gets to the very difficult nature of this war,
right?
And the immense human tragedy that has been inflicted on far too many people.
But if it happened, it's not a war crime, or is it a war crime?
So I'm never going to be able to make an assessment here. You saw us today make a conclusion about war crimes after a very deliberate fact-finding process where we then apply the facts to the law. It's not something I can do responding to a report. Just please let me finish my answers before you interrupt. I will take all of your questions.
Sure.
It is not something I can do responding to a report from the podium.
Okay.
It's not something he can do. He can't respond to reports that babies have been ripped out of incubators or taken out of incubators because, they can no longer function. Or we've seen impromptu methods developed to try to keep some of these babies alive. But also, the babies were found decomposing. These are news reports. It's not a war crime that Israel's attack, the invasion, or anything like this has affected the babies in the incubators. Well, look, okay, I happen to know my history. It's something people should know. Frequently, people have amnesia when it comes to U.S. acts globally, although many of our memories were refreshed by the long overdue and welcome death of Henry Kissinger. So we refamiliarize ourselves with the millions upon millions of people that were killed and the blood that Kissinger had on his hands. But I take you back to the early 90s, and the woman who was put forward and was lying was paid to spread propaganda and tell us about babies that were being pulled out of incubators. This was before our congressional committee. This was on Capitol Hill. Her name was Nayyirah. It turned out that there was a PR firm that was involved in her testimony. But nonetheless, this is what she said. She said these remarks, and let's just get a flavor of it again to see how abominable it is that if Saddam Hussein is responsible for the deaths of babies, well, we need to send in the troops. But if Israeli forces are somehow implicated in the deaths of babies, then, well, there's not much we can do.
My mother and I were in Kuwait on August 2nd for a peaceful summer holiday. My older sister had a baby on July 29th, and we wanted to spend some time in Kuwait with her. I only pray that none of my 10th grade classmates had a summer vacation like I did. I may have wished sometime that I could be an adult, that I could grow up quickly. What I saw happen to the children of Kuwait and to my country has changed my life forever. It has changed the life of all Kuwaitis, young and old. We are children no more. My sister, with my 5-day-old nephew, traveled across the desert to safety. There is no milk available for the baby in Kuwait. They barely escaped when their car was stuck in the desert sand, and help came from Saudi Arabia. I stayed behind and wanted to do something for my country. The second week after an invasion, I volunteered at the Al-Adan hospital with 12 other women who wanted to help as well. I was the youngest volunteer. The other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor.
A lie. It was a lie. She was paid, and she lied.
It was horrifying. I could not help but think of my nephew, who, if born premature, might have died that day as well. After I left the hospital, some of my friends and I distributed flyers condemning the Iraqi invasion until we were warned we might be killed if the Iraqis saw us. The Iraqis have destroyed everything in Kuwait. They stripped the supermarkets of food.
All right. You get the point. That is what I thought could illustrate that the U.S. government has cared about babies being ripped out of incubators, and it does claim to care about children. It just depends on what country in which they were born. And unfortunately for Palestinians, those children do not have in the U.S. government people who see them as human lives worth saving, people worth being outraged about. And then in that case, when we're talking about Iraq, they faked that babies were pulled out of incubators to help gin up support for an invasion of Iraq. And so there you have it. And that's Matthew Miller. And there's one more thing that I want to work in here.
I understand, but
and
spokesperson for the United Nations, defender
and
of people, men, women, and
I'm
children
pushing this
who
a
are
little
trying
bit
to
forward
stay
because I've taken a lot longer with this than I anticipated. But I want to hear you. I want to hear him get to the part where he's asked about these UN sites and how he plays with language in a way that we all who are familiar with 1984 know how language can be played with. He decides to make a distinction without a difference and use jargon to say that, okay, he never claimed that these UN sites were safe. But that's not what we have been hearing from Matthew Miller.
alive and get some food, get some water. We have seen since the beginning of this conflict that those places that fly the UN flag have not been safe either. You comment on that?
So I will say, first of all, I did not say that there were safe zones. That is a very different
You
concept.
said there were safe zones.
Saeed, again, can we just establish a ground rule that I won't interrupt you and you won't interrupt me? I did not say that there were safe zones. That is a different concept. We have seen earlier in this conflict the idea of safe zones, and what instead we have supported are areas that are deconfliction sites, and there are sites that are UN flagged facilities that Israel is aware where those sites are. Israel has placed them on deconfliction lists, and Israel is not supposed to target those sites. That is what I was referring to. We continue to support people moving to those sites where they can be safe from harm. But again, we recognize the very difficult situation on the ground and the very difficult choices that many Palestinian civilians are having to make every day.
Just follow up on
Yeah.
that. You're making a distinction between the safe zone
Yeah, just-
and deconfliction.
So just to be very clear, so there has been ideas at one point of safe zones, entire areas. There's this area over near the beach, an entire area that looks more like a refugee camp that people
So
could.
you're talking
people
just
could.
the
I'm talking
size then.
about it's not just size. There, instead of like designated, it's neighborhoods where the Israel is not conducting operations. So right, you've seen them flag areas where they intend to conduct major combat operations, told people to leave those areas, go to other areas where they're not currently conducting operations. In addition to that, there are facilities, schools and other places, UN sites, UNRWA sites, where people are taking shelter. And those sites are on deconfliction lists and are not supposed to be struck by the Israeli army. That's what I was referring to.
All right. Well, enough of that. But as you probably know, if you've watched this long into the video, or if you're paying any attention to what Matthew Miller is saying, all of this just serves to apologize and rationalize and justify the systematic, brutal violence that is being carried out against defenseless population that they're supposed to take care of. These are their occupied territories. Israel has control over them. They do not have a state. They don't have an independent government. They're not recognized globally. They are under the control of the Israeli government. And so almost everything that they do is dependent on whether Israel will lift a blockade or not wage a siege or not mount a siege or choose to allow humanitarian aid so that people can get the food, water, and medical supplies that they need. If there's going to be a rebuilding or construction of homes, a rebuild of neighborhoods, that's going to happen with the permission of the Israeli government to get those supplies into the West Bank or Gaza. If there's a need for that, and there absolutely is, obviously. And so all of this that Matthew Miller has said is despicable, but it comes with what he's been asked to do. He has been asked to lie to people and justify all of this violence. So that gets me to what I want to share with you for the last bit of this show. I'm going to pay tribute to the journalists that have been massacred or killed. And so far, we've seen around 75 journalists killed or massacred. And those people who have died, they deserve to be humanized. I'll go so far as to say that there are going to be a few that pop up here who are Israeli. They died on October 7th. I think they deserve to be humanized as well, because even if they did not see Palestinians as human beings, even if they were propagandists themselves for the apartheid state in some manner, I don't really know their work, but even such, they were dehumanized. They lived a life as dehumanized individuals because this apartheid state and how it operates in Gaza and the West Bank. And so their suffering, their deaths have come because this has not stopped, because of 75 years later, this is the reality of what Palestinians must deal with. And this is violence that is more intense than anything I have observed in my short life. I've only been around for a few decades, but people who are much older might disagree. In my short lifetime, I've not seen this intensity. This 20,000 people killed. Usually it had been like 5 to 1,000, many people injured. The damage had always been pretty horrific. We've always seen that the ordnance that they used could do quite a lot of damage to buildings and structures, but they are going for an ethnic cleansing here. They're wiping out the history that Gaza has. They are destroying archives, and they don't want journalists to show what's happening on the ground. And so let's get to it. I have the names of all of these people here, and this will be how I round out the show. But thank you, all of you who have tuned in live. I appreciate you being here to watch this. Please share the show with people. Post this on your social media. If you like what's going on with this, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'm going to be posting many more shorter clips from these broadcasts so that I can boost the channel and get it some attention. And this work I will be doing more of alongside the work that I do with the dissenter. So without further ado, this is a tribute to, and I've only got 13 lined up today. I'll come back later on and I'll keep going until I'm all the way through the list. I said there are 75. We'll do 13 of these people today, and then we'll keep going as I do these broadcasts. And if the violence would end mercifully, and as we are in the aftermath trying to pick up the pieces, I will continue to honor the lives of these journalists that have been snuffed out by Israeli military bombardment. So here we have Ibrahim Lafi, October 7th. Ibrahim Lafi was a photographer for Ayin Media, was shot and killed at the Gaza Strip's Erez crossing into Israel. That's according to the Palestinian press freedom group MADA, the Beirut-based press freedom group Eskiz, and Al Jazeera. And I have a heart-wrenching video to share for this. Of course, October 7th is the day of the Hamas attack. But here, I want to play this video from a friend of Ibrahim. And this is one of the few pieces that I have, a video or written report or anything. This is one of the few people who have shared testimony about the loss or the death of their friend. This is an interview that Gaza journalist Yara Aid gave to Middle East Eye. I don't have these for the vast majority of the people who I'll be paying tribute to here. And so this is an important thing to work into the show. So here.
Speaking of friends, I mean, one person that you speak about quite a bit is Ibrahim Lafi, and he's he was one of your best friends, if not your best friend, and he was tragically killed while carrying his duties as a journalist.
Ibrahim was the first one I lost in this genocide. Ibrahim was killed on the 7th of October. I talked to him on the 6th of October at night. I was joking with him, and I told him, I'll call you tomorrow because I'm very tired, I need to sleep, I had work. And I don't know what to tell you about Ibrahim. He was 21. Ibrahim became my friend from the first day I kind of went to Gaza. Like after, I think, a month, I started interning at Ain Media.
You speak quite well of his journalism. I mean, you talked that he was quite
yeah, but that's how I met him. You know, I met him in the beginning, just when I was interning at Ain Media, and I met him on the first day, and I was surprised. I was like, you know, he's 2 years younger than me, and I was like so surprised that he's already like, you know, an employee, and he's so talented, and he's a photographer, he's a journalist. Like, I was so surprised. I was like, I used to think I'm the youngest one in any office I'm in, and he was the youngest one, and he was so talented. And day by day, he wasn't just a colleague, he became my best friend, literally. Like, the person I would call when I'm mad, the person I would call when I'm sad, the person I would call when I'm happy, the person I would share the stupidest details with. I wrote a tribute to him, and I said, Israel killed all of my friends, because Ibrahim felt like all of my friends. He was literally, I don't know, he made me feel like I had 100 friends by my side at all times. We covered the 2022 war, aggression, you know, and
any memories from that together?
Yeah, he was. I'm sorry, it's very difficult to talk about it. Just before, when we were interning together, he made sure that, for example, I didn't have experience in, you know, photography, filmmaking. That's what I started to intern as. And whenever we would be on set or something, he always made sure he's teaching me. He was so sweet. He's always made sure, like, he passes his knowledge to me. And he always made sure that, like...
Even though he was the younger one.
He was the younger one, but he had so much knowledge in this field. I was new to it. He has been doing it he even studied media, you know. So he was like with photography and stuff, because I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I started like, you know, I haven't had practical experience, you know. The only experience I had was like more like writing and directing, but not actually using the cameras and stuff like that. And he used to like be like, okay, I'll give you lessons. After this set, we go and we study for 2 hours, and he would give me homework, and he was like, he was my secret mentor. He always made sure, even he was the youngest, he felt like the father of the group, and he always made sure that to look after us. But yeah, he was so young though.
That's Ibrahim, and that's Yar Aid, a Gaza journalist who gave that moving summation of what Ibrahim meant to her as a best friend. Moving along to the next, on October 7th, Mohammed Jaroun was killed. And both of these that I've read now are most all of these are from the Committee to Protect Journalists. The Committee to Protect Journalists has done a fairly good job of tracking the deaths. They may have missed some, but it's a pretty good list that they've put together, and a good place to begin in paying tribute to these journalists. So Jargoon was a journalist with Smart Media. He was shot while reporting on the conflict in an area to the east of Rafah City in the southern Gaza Strip. Palestinian press freedom group MADA and the Journalist Support Committee, a nonprofit which promotes the rights of the media in the Middle East. And that was on October 7th. And then the next person I have here is Mohammed Salhi. On October 7th, freelance journalist El Salhi was shot dead on the border to the east of Al-Barej, a Palestinian refugee camp in the central Gaza Strip, according to the Palestinian Authority's official news agency, WAFA, and the Journalist Support Committee, a nonprofit which promotes the rights of the media in the Middle East. That's according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. I have 3 Israeli journalists who were killed. These are people killed in the Hamas attack. This is Yaniv Zohar on October 7th. He was an Israeli photographer. He worked for the Hebrew language daily newspaper Israel Hayom. He was killed he was in the kibbutz Nahal Az in southern Israel. He was with his wife and 2 daughters. And he was an AP video journalist in the Israel Bureau for 15 years, from 2005 to 2020. He had an expertise on the warfare that took place near his home and near the border of the Gaza Strip. AP executive editor Julie Pace said Yaniv was AP's eyes and ears in southern Israel, always among the first to respond to news in the busy region. He was a part of the community where he worked, giving him insights that were invaluable to his colleagues. When tensions rose in the Middle East, colleagues would quickly ask, what does Yaniv say? Then there is Ayelet Arnin, who was a 22-year-old news editor with the Israel Broadcasting Corporation, Khan. She was killed during the attack on the music festival in southern Israel, and was a U.S. citizen. So she was killed at the party that was attacked by Hamas. Then there's Shai Regev, who was serving as an editor for TMI. She was involved in gossip and entertainment news. He was killed in the attack on the music festival in southern Israel. Now, what I will say is that these people were not out in the field reporting on the conflict and killed, but nonetheless, they were journalists, and they've been included in these reports of journalist deaths. Then on October 8th, Assad Shamlak was killed. He was a freelance journalist. He was killed with 9 members of his family in an Israeli airstrike on their home in Sheikh Ijim, a neighborhood in the southern Gaza Strip. That's according to the Beirut-based advocacy group, The Legal Agenda, and BBC Arabic. That's from the Committee to Protect Journalists. And on October 10th, we have 3 journalists who were killed, and they were all killed on early Tuesday in an Israeli military airstrike that hit a residential building near Gaza City's fishing port. So this person here is Hisham al-Nwaja, a journalist with Kabar news agency, was injured when the warplanes hit the area. This was an area that was housing several media outlets in Gaza City's Rimal district, according to the UK-based newspaper, the independent Al Jazeera, and the Palestinian Authority's official news agency, Wafa. Mohammed Saab was a photographer from Kabar news agency. He was killed when Israel planes struck an area housing these media outlets in the Rimal district. Again, the same strike. And then there's Saeed al-Tawil, and he was the editor-in-chief of the Al-Qamza news website, killed in this airstrike. Again, based on all the sources, these journalists were all killed in the same bombing. If we go forward to October 11th, Mohammed Fayez Abu Matar was a freelance photojournalist, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, and he was killed during an Israeli airstrike in Rafah City in the southern Gaza Strip. And they got their information from the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate and the Palestinian Authority's official news agency, Wafa. The following day, on October 12th, Ahmed Shahab was killed. Ahmed Shahab was a journalist for South Al-Asra Radio, which is radio voice of the prisoners. He, along with his wife and 3 children, were killed in this airstrike on their house in Jabalia in the northern Gaza Strip, according to the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate, Palestinian Press Freedom Group MADA, and the London-based news website, The New Arab. I have a clip that I found that went viral. This is of Shahab, of Ahmed, and it shows him. Let's go ahead and I'll pull this up here. Ahmed Shahab. So here he is. This went pretty viral, and he was, it was noted that he had been giving people warning the day that he was killed, that he was speaking to. He did a TikTok video. I think that's what this is. Let me pull this up. Present, share.
This might be my last video. This is my message for the world. We have been cut off from food and electricity and water and everything. And we cannot leave our house because they are killing us from inside and outside. Until now, no one has moved. We don't want you to move because of us or Palestine only. We need you to move because of the violence targeting Al-Aqsa Mosque. There is no difference between Al-Kaaba and Al-Aqsa Mosque. What are you waiting for? We don't want you to support us with food or money. We want you to move. Please move. Okay. This might be my...
There he is. And I think that was the day that he was killed. And then there's Issam Abdallah on October 13th. And on that day, he was killed. He's a Beirut-based videographer for the Reuters news agency. And then to round out the broadcast, I have a video to play of about the strike that killed him. It was on journalists. I believe he was in Lebanon, and Israel targeted him. There's an investigation that was done by Human Rights Watch, and they put together this video that documents what took place. So let me pull this up here.
On October 13, 2023, Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon killed Issam Abdallah, a Reuters journalist. The attack injured 6 other journalists from Reuters, Agence France Presse, and Al Jazeera.
I will always remember his wit and his humor. He was the dynamo of the press scene and of Reuters in general.
ما بعتقد في حدا مهضوم أكتر من عصام. ما بعتقد في حدا سبورتيف أكتر من عصام.
Human Rights Watch investigated the attack to determine the cause, who carried it out, and its legality.
I don't know what justice looks like. We lost someone, and he's not coming back. And Christina, her life will never be the same. I don't know how you replace that. For me, justice, the only type of justice that we can get now is accountability.
Visual evidence suggests that Israeli forces targeted the journalists who were filming at a known live position far from military targets. The attacks were likely deliberate and an apparent war crime.
We were a group of 7 journalists, all wearing press vests, all wearing helmets, with cameras, with 3 live feeds for 3 international agencies. And we were hit twice directly in a matter of 37 seconds.
The digital investigations team at Human Rights Watch verified 49 videos and dozens of photos from before, during, and after the incident, analyzed satellite imagery of the area, interviewed witnesses, and consulted with arms and audio experts. Among the visual evidence collated by Human Rights Watch is the feed from the cameras of the journalists who were there that day. Just before 5 p.m. on October 13th, the 7 journalists from Reuters, Agence France Presse, and Al Jazeera congregated in Al-Mashab in southern Lebanon, roughly 1 to 2 kilometers from the Israeli border.
كمان كانت بالنسبة لنا كان موقع جيد لأنه قادرين عم نقدر نصور القصف من دون ما نعرض حياتنا للخطر.
They were there to report on clashes between the Israeli military and Lebanese and Palestinian armed groups in southern Lebanon.
When we arrived around 5 p.m., we were really only just filming this huge pillar of smoke that was coming, rising up beyond a hill to our south along the border. And maybe about 15 minutes later, we started to see incoming shelling from the Israeli side hitting the areas in Lebanon along the border. We were calm, collected, working as safe as you can in this kind of environment.
Evidence reviewed by Human Rights Watch indicates that the Israeli military knew or should have known that the group of people they were firing on were civilians.
And that's a pretty clear-cut war crime. And I know that all war, in some way or another, is a crime, but this is language that is used to determine who should be accountable and who should not be held accountable for acts of violence. Nation states, should they be brought before some kind of court, some kind of international body? We see now that the United Nations is taking an unprecedented act of invoking an article, part of its charter, to push for a ceasefire in Gaza, to pressure the Israeli government to stop this violence. And it's remarkable where we are as I conclude this broadcast. It's well known that about 66% of deaths have been civilians. And I don't know how you determine what people are Hamas militants and what aren't Hamas militants. I don't know the criteria with the Israeli government. I'm skeptical as somebody who covered closely the drone strikes that took place under President Barack Obama when he was having people who were 16, 17, or 18 designated as terrorists simply because they were military-age males. They were no longer children. And they didn't have to be holding a gun or wearing some kind of whatever fighters would be deployed in wearing. They were no longer children because the government deemed them not. The CIA and the U.S. military. And I presume that that's what the Israeli military can do to Palestinians, that through unspecific webs of association and affiliation, they can connect families and people to Hamas and move their deaths from civilian column to the enemies killed in action column. But it's probably even higher. So Israel has said 66%. It's actually believed, based on a human rights monitor called Euromed Monitor, that 90% of the people killed are civilians. So then you have that 10%. And are those 10%, can we even say with confidence that those are Hamas? Or are those Palestinian fighters? I don't know. They're not really allowing journalists into Gaza. It's not safe for journalists to be in Gaza. So can we really document this? I'd say the Euromed Monitor might even be undercounting. I'm sure they would probably admit that this is, again, still a pretty conservative estimate. It could be far worse. It could be higher. I guess what I'm saying is it could be higher than 90%. And that is staggering. And so here we are. We don't know when this is going to stop, but I thank you for tuning in to the show. Like I said, I'll be putting shorter clips up to share. So if you're going, well, you just did an hour and 20-minute broadcast, and I don't know if my friends or family are going to sit through all of this. Well, stay tuned. I'll get some shorter clips up there. And I'm going to actually pull out the tribute I did for the journalists and send it out specifically to the Dissenter newsletter, because those people who are subscribed are interested in that kind of a thing much more than me shit-talking Matthew Miller, but also doing an important breakdown because I believe that he has become this chief propagandist for the war. I'll just acknowledge you, Ghosts. Thank you for tuning into the show. You were here today, and I'm glad that you were here to watch the broadcast. And thank you for the appreciation. It's been a while. I took 2 months off. I did a broadcast last week. I'm now a dad. I have a newborn, and there's a lot going on in my own personal life. So I am getting back into a routine. But if I can do a broadcast or a second broadcast during the weeks, I intend to do it. I think as we go into the holidays at the end of December, you probably won't see a broadcast, but I have the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast with Rania Kalik that is posted here. I have an interview coming this weekend. And then there's the Belmarsh Tribunal with several witnesses that are going to speak up for Julian Assange and, again, make the case in Washington, D.C. for freeing Julian Assange. I was invited to be a part of the Belmarsh Tribunal that was in D.C. back in January. There are people who are part of the roster of witnesses that have endorsed my book. One of them, Abby Martin, has been an incredible voice when it comes to fighting for the liberation of Palestinians. She made a documentary, Gaza Fights for Freedom, and she was kind enough to do the foreword for my book, and she'll be speaking as a witness and part of that Belmarsh Tribunal in D.C. On Saturday, I'll have well, I haven't decided exactly yet, but if things line up, I'll try and stream the tribunal and then maybe have some running commentary or watch along with you. I don't know, whatever it might be. I want to hear what these witnesses have to say because I pay close attention to the advocacy around Assange. And it's really important. Period of limbo right now, and we need to see him freed. But with that, yeah. Thank you, Kristen. Appreciate it. And thank you, Jim. And thanks. Yeah, thank you for tuning into the show. All right. I need to go take care of my daughter and be a parent and also take a little break from journalism for the rest of the day. But you all have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you more soon.